Well, if you think that typing is the most difficult thing about programming, you really don't understand programming.
Right. Hooray! Welcome to the first episode of Three Bosses.
All right, awesome.
Great.
What was I going to tell you about?
How the name came to be?
Oh, how the name came to be.
Well, we've been thinking a lot about the dysfunctions of working at any large company.
Oh, yeah. Three bosses walk into a room and nothing gets done.
Right.
Oh, my God. What a nightmare.
Yes.
Honestly, one boss walks into a room a lot of times and nothing gets done.
Right.
I was talking to one of my friends last night. He's a tech guy, but he's mostly been working in games for like 15 years or 20 years or something. And his experiences are similar, but he's also worked at a bunch of big FANG companies, which is kind of interesting having a gaming background. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we were talking about was essentially like having a boss who really understands what you do and can support you and make sure that you can do your work is really important. Mm-hmm. But there's a difference between having a boss who can support you and allow you to do your work and having a boss who has done your work and genuinely understands it.
Right.
And I think as a designer, I have had non-designer bosses, some good, but then I've also had bosses who I thought were going to be fantastic because they had also worked as designers, some of them recently. But I've found a lot of times that those bosses who have shared my role are not necessarily good at letting go of control about the final end product or supporting the design process. And instead, they try to control the outcome too much. And it essentially means that all of the people working underneath them just kind of become their hands and they are the mind. And I don't think that's the role for a manager either.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I was thinking really differentiates a great boss from a bad one is just having somebody who fundamentally understands the problem space that you're working in and can provide feedback or talk through it with you.
Right.
They don't need to give you the final answer, but can engage with you as a peer and think through it, then allow you to go and figure out all of the little details while they run interference and keep people from changing the plan underneath you.
Yeah.
I've only had a few bosses who have really excelled at that.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. I mean, it's always obvious, right?
Right.
Even like within a few days, it's obvious. I was going to say something about something you said earlier, which was that other people just become the hands. It feels like there's just one mind running the whole thing. So one of the things that I've noticed is like there's two main reasons why that emerges. One reason is that this manager in their past has been deeply betrayed or hurt by a former business partner.
Oh, interesting.
So they have zero trust in other people. So their number one priority is just to maintain absolute control no matter what, so that no one has the power to undermine them or hurt their progress like what happened in the past. That's like the first reason why that happens. In other words, it's by design. Yeah, go ahead.
By business partner, are you talking about somebody from outside of their discipline, outside of their team?
Look, it could be even at the same company, or it could be from a previous company where they've worked before, where they were like jockeying with someone and then they lost the jockey.
Are you talking about two designers or two developers who are on the same team? And if you're a developer and your boss is a developer and their past experience, some other developer stabbed them in the back basically and changed it through politics? The other thing I was thinking is maybe like you're talking about their developer and some product manager came and stabbed them in the back.
I mean, I don't see why not. That could probably produce the same thing.
Sure.
I think where I've seen it the most though is if they were acquired, like if they were running a small startup in their history and they had a co-founder or a business colleague who took the company from them.
Interesting.
Or like if some big dramatic shakeup happened and they were the victim in it, they'll like never trust anyone again. And the only way that they'll work is just to maintain absolute control over all the major information channels and decision making, period. And that's the only way that they'll work anywhere. And they'll never compromise on that.
That's so problematic and toxic for so many reasons. When you're in that position, it's hard to take feedback or genuinely listen, especially if you're a manager, like your team is telling you often based on their recent hands-on experience that like something will or won't work. If you can't take that feedback and kind of relinquish the control over the outcomes a tiny bit, basically you just might as well not have those people. Like don't hire seniors at that point. Hire interns or hire contractors who can just do what you're asking. Because it makes me think about when I first heard about the idea of pair programming, I know I had a kind of knee-jerk reaction. Like, wow, you're wasting a developer by pair programming. And I have heard that that's basically a really common reaction. Like, wow, you have two people sitting at one computer staring at the same code and only one person is typing. How wasteful. How can you even justify that? And the clever response, I smile every time I think about it, that I heard to this is, well, if you think that typing is the most difficult thing about programming, you really don't understand programming. And I think that is just as true in programming as it is in design. So if you think that making round corners or selecting colors or whatever it may be is the most difficult part of design, you really don't understand design. Because like design is problem solving. It's thinking through a problem space. It's thinking about not only the immediate problem that you're working on, like what does this button look like, but how does this fit into the ecosystem? And how should this be aligned compared to everything else that you have going on? Adding one button sounds like, oh, well, it's no big deal. It's a button. But if you already have 7 buttons on that screen, you've got a real problem. And so I need an entirely different solution here. But a lot of times people who are not really thinking from this holistic perspective, it's like, sure, just add one more button. It's fine.
Right.
But before long, your navigation has 1,200 links in it and you can't really find anything.
Yeah. I think the other way that I've seen that structure emerge is this person was taught or raised in a management culture where that's all they knew. Literally, I'm talking about the case where this person has done the IC work, right? But they were managed and they were trained as a manager while they were an IC in this really toxic management culture where like the only way that people are managed is through just like authoritarian one directional feedback kind of a thing.
That's such a problematic circumstance. It's because in that case, they never had the opportunity to make mistakes or make choices. Then when you're in the position to solve problems, you don't really know how to do it because you just did whatever you were told.
Yeah.
That is the difference between knowing the rules and knowing the intent of the rules.
Right.
Experience really does matter. And a few weeks of experience, I would say, is worth more than years of training and reading and getting anecdotal accounts from other people or from online. When you've actually done the job, that is a different perspective.
Yeah. To your point, experience is king. And here's the sad part is that like if the only experience you have is around really bad management culture and that's your experience with management as an IC, then when you go to get promoted, that you're just going to perpetuate that.
That's awful because I mean that also creates kind of an exponentially scaling problem because when we allow these types of relationships to exist and we don't push back on them and we don't try and like manage up and change these relationships. Well, now you've got potentially 20 new managers.
And then those people are probably going to go into like management at some point and bring about the same conditions.
Right. It's really hard being an IC and having a not good boss and being in a position where you can either just keep your head down and whatever you'll get paid and get no troubles, or you can stand up and say like, hey, look, I think that we can change this dynamic and we can have a better outcome. It's really hard to be that person. But if we as an industry aren't willing to stand up and say, hey, I think there's a problem here, then it really doesn't get better.
Right.
And it's scary.
Right.
But I like to believe that the squeaky wheel gets the grease. But in my experience, when it comes to business, squeaky wheel gets replaced. It's cheaper to just put in something that works well than to take the time to figure out why something is not working.
Well put.
It's so different from how we as Americans think about how society works. And we want to give people second chances and we want to invest in relationships. But really, that's how it works in business is like, it's just better to solve a problem. And that's why Amazon, when you return products to them, a number of times there's been kind of news and outrage as people realize that when you return products, for the most part, if it's like fulfilled by Amazon, it's not going back into the box. It's not getting sent to someone else. They just put it in a landfill. And so their generous returns policy, I'm sure they can take all of those returns as write-offs. So great, it doesn't hurt them as a business, but it hurts the planet. But if we perceived this purchase process as being so much more destructive because businesses can just write it off and they don't want to take the risk that you infected some child's toy with COVID and then returned it, like even if it was completely innocent and unintentional and you didn't know, it's just better for them to send a clean toy. So it makes sense from a problem mitigation or a problem avoidance perspective, but also it's so wasteful and it's not a emotionally healthy way to engage.
Yeah, you know that phrase, the personal becomes political. Just like you said, in our personal lives, we've all grown up with this culture of just throw it away. It's really cheap to replace. And I don't know if you remember reading 1984.
I haven't read it, actually.
Oh, okay, yeah. One of the themes in that book that doesn't get as much attention is this frequent repetition of how the citizenry in the fictitious country in 1984, the citizenry are constantly being told not to repair or restitch their clothing or their boots or like tires. There's these mantras like, better just to replace, not to repair. And the first time reading it, you might scratch your head and go like, why is I thought this book was about like politics.
Yeah.
Like I thought this book was about a dystopian political regime. Why are we talking about repairing clothes?
Well, when you apply that to people.
Yeah, it's like the personal is political. So these microcosms, like you said, how we deal with our relationships to the things we own or the objects that we wear or whatever can sometimes act as a reference for how we've been instructed to treat people at our company, let's say, or how a company has decided to treat people.
Totally.
Right. So I really endorse what you're saying here.
Now that makes me think of people who treat the janitor the same as the CEO is like,
Right.
That's really honorable to not treat somebody as lower than you simply because they're not in a job that you particularly would want to do.
Right.
I think that's blue collar work in America. I don't think that there's the same kind of social reverence for it that we used to have. These kinds of people who make society run. Now, in the last century, this perspective has shifted to only the insanely wealthy or famous are the valuable people, and everyone else is like, well, I don't want my kid to become an electrician, or I don't want my kid to become a firefighter. Sure, they might save lives or they might protect people by wiring their houses properly, but I want them to be rich. I want whatever. And yeah, I can definitely see the value of wanting your kids to have this easy life and what you imagine is associated with these levels of status. But what you have implicitly done there is also said that normal people who are doing the jobs that make society run are beneath you and are beneath your family. And when you institutionalize that, you can write off anybody for any reason.
Yeah, agreed.
Heavy stuff. All right. That's the problem you get with one boss. And I think the crazy thing about my experiences in tech is a lot of times you have 2 bosses or 3 bosses who you're accountable to.
Right.
And so these problems just get magnified. You have 2 bosses who both want to control everything. Now it's a tug of war between them, and organizations that allow these types of management. And at this point, I'm talking about downward looking, the managers of these managers. If they allow this kind of engagement with the individual contributors on the bottom level, then they're the people who really should be responsible for correcting the way that the managers beneath them engage with the teams 2 levels beneath them. And I feel like that's a huge challenge in the industry right now, that once you get above an individual contributor, and especially once you get above that bottom level of manager, you get to a point they kind of become untouchable. It really benefits them the most to not have any changes and to not worry about what's going on the bottom level, because it's never going to blow back on them.
Right.
If there's complaints about the pushy manager who's too controlling, well, then same thing, just replace that manager. And so you really get these problems institutionalized basically because of this notion that people are replaceable. And so I feel like manager is a person who manages people, obviously, but we also use this term boss. And I feel like boss is just kind of a yucky term. It's like we say girl boss or I want to be a boss, but the idea of being a boss is this gross pushing people around feeling, at least for me. So it's funny because I feel like I'm a natural leader and I enjoy leading teams, but I specifically like managing because I like helping people grow their skills and learn how to work through these problems. I like seeing that personal individual growth and having people come into their own and feel empowered, and being able to help people is really great.
Right.
And I feel like a really great manager is a great teacher. In this case, we're just talking about the challenges and our perspectives, and problems are not going to get fixed. So it kind of feels appropriate. 3 bosses, nothing gets done. I don't know if we'll do sponsors in the future, but this video was sponsored by us.
Yes. You want your product to reach an audience of us, 2 people, then we're the right podcast for you.
Totally. Yeah, this is really fun. I'm looking forward to doing more of these. I hope that people can find this and feel like this is relevant to them. If we do kind of grow an audience, we're really happy to answer questions or talk to other people who want to share their experiences.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
I think this could be a good opportunity to create community. And for me, having community and not feeling isolated, it's one of the biggest differences in emotional well-being, and feeling like, man, this is dreadful and there's no hope, versus, maybe the situation sucks, but I can see that there's a possibility for this to get better.
Great. Well, yeah, I had a ton of fun too, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
And